Today, we're counting down 8 Wild West guns so deadly, so feared, they were banned. From tiny pistols you could hide in a sleeve, to the Colt revolver itself being outlawed in famous frontier towns, these weren't just weapons. They were flashpoints for the West's most violent showdowns. If you rode into Dodge City in 1880, would you have obeyed the sign and handed over your revolver, or kept it on your hip no matter what? Tell me below. I'll be watching the comments. Number 8. Derringers and pocket pistols. The outlawed concealed guns. These were the weapons gamblers, barkeeps, and outlaws loved because they could vanish in a vest pocket, a sleeve, or even a boot. The most famous? The Philadelphia Derringer, the kind John Wilkes Booth used to assassinate President Lincoln. On the frontier, towns like Tombstone and Deadwood passed ordinances that banned concealed weapons. That meant these tiny pistols, designed for surprise, were effectively illegal the moment you stepped inside the city limits. You could wear a 6-shooter on your hip in plain view, but slip a Derringer into your coat, and suddenly you were breaking the law. Lawmakers called them weapons of assassins. They weren't for showdowns at high noon, they were for getting close, firing once, and slipping away. So here's the question. Would you have trusted one of these little pistols as your only weapon, or would you risk carrying a full-sized revolver and facing the sheriff's wrath? Let me know what you'd pick. And while the Derringer was banned for being too easy to hide, the next weapon earned its reputation for the exact opposite reason. It was so loud, unpredictable, and dangerous that nobody wanted it in town. Number 7. The Pepperbox pistol, the multi-barreled gun towns didn't trust. These pistols looked intimidating, with 4, 5, sometimes even 6 barrels clustered together. The idea was simple. Just keep pulling the trigger and fire round after round without reloading. But in practice, Pepperboxes were heavy, inaccurate, and had a nasty habit of all their barrels firing at once. They were cheap, they were unpredictable, and they scared both lawmen and civilians. In fact, Pepperboxes were often swept up in concealed weapon bans right alongside Derringers. The logic was clear. They were perfect for ambushes, not self-defense. Newspapers in the 1850s described them as pocket cannons, more likely to harm the shooter than the target. Still, gamblers and outlaws carried them because they were easy to hide and terrifying up close. Would you rather risk carrying a Pepperbox that might explode in your hand, or go unarmed inside a frontier town that banned your revolver? Drop your choice below. And if the Pepperbox was dangerous because it fired too much, the next weapon was banned for the opposite reason. It was part gun, part knife, and lawmakers saw it as far too deadly to allow in polite society. Number 6. The Bowie knife revolver, half gun, half blade, and fully outlawed. Frontier gunsmiths sometimes blurred the line between pistol and knife, creating bizarre hybrids, revolvers with massive Bowie blades fixed underneath, or knives with tiny firing chambers built into the handle. They looked like something out of a dime novel, but they terrified lawmakers. Why? Because they were designed for one thing: ambush. Fire a shot at close range, then finish the job with a blade. These weren't the weapons of a cowboy on the trail. They were weapons of assassins. Several states banned Bowie knives outright, often pairing those bans with restrictions on pistols when carried concealed. Georgia's famous 1846 court case, Nunn v. Georgia, struck down a blanket ban on handguns, but left concealed carry restrictions intact. In practice, that meant Bowie knives, knife guns, and other deadly hybrids were illegal in many territories of the West. And even where laws weren't crystal clear, reputation did the work. A man caught carrying one of these weapons could expect to be fined, disarmed, or branded as dishonorable. And while these hybrids were banned for being too deadly in a fight, the next weapon on our list was banned for a very different reason. It was too dangerous to carry at all, especially on the iron rails of the American frontier. Number 5. Repeating rifles. The gun that won the West, but not on the railroad. The Winchester 1873 is legendary, called the gun that won the West. Its lever-action design gave frontiersmen more firepower than almost anything else of the era. But step onto a train with one, and suddenly it was banned. By the early 1880s, railroads like the Union Pacific and Central Pacific introduced strict rules. Passengers had to check their rifles in the baggage car, often under lock and key. Even cased rifles couldn't ride with you in the passenger cars. The reason was simple: too many accidents, too many near misses in crowded coaches. A rifle that could fire 15 shots in under half a minute was fine on the prairie. But in a cramped train car, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Frontier newspapers reported complaints from passengers, but the companies stood firm. Their trains were the lifeline of the West, and one accidental discharge could kill a paying customer or even set the car ablaze. If you were riding across hostile territory, would you have trusted your life to the conductor's rules or smuggled a Winchester onto the train anyway? And while rifles were banned on railroads for safety, the next weapons were banned right inside the towns themselves, where firing a single shot could land you straight in jail. Number 4, the street revolver. Outlawed not for carrying, but for firing. Everyone pictures frontier towns as places where gunfire rang out at all hours. But the reality was very different. In places like the Dakota Territory, city leaders passed laws that made it illegal to discharge a firearm inside town limits. The reason wasn't about duels or gunfights, it was about safety. Celebratory gunfire, firing into the air during dances, holidays, or saloon brawls, too often ended with a bullet landing in someone's chest 2 blocks away. Sheriffs and marshals didn't want to take chances. If you fired your Colt in the middle of town, you could be fined, arrested, or worse. Theodore Roosevelt himself recalled that in his Dakota years, frontier towns made it clear: no shooting in the streets, period. Think about that. The Colt Single Action Army, the most famous revolver of the frontier, was banned not by name, but by use. Carry it if you wanted, but fire it downtown, and you'd find yourself on the wrong side of the law. And if shooting your revolver in town could get you arrested, the next entry is even bolder. One of the West's most famous towns banned the carrying of firearms altogether. Number 3, the Colt revolver, banned in the most dangerous cow town of them all, Dodge City. By the late 1870s, Dodge had earned its reputation as the wildest town on the frontier. Cattle drives, saloons, and gunfighters filled the streets. The solution? Ban the very weapon that made the town so dangerous in the first place. At the edge of Dodge City, a sign greeted visitors with a simple warning: the carrying of firearms strictly prohibited. Sheriffs like Bat Masterson and Charlie Bassett enforced it without hesitation. Visitors were required to surrender their revolvers, most often the Colt Single Action Army, the so-called Peacemaker. It was the most iconic handgun of the West, but inside Dodge City's limits, it was illegal. Keep it on your hip, and you risked arrest, a fine, or worse. The irony is hard to miss. The gun that symbolized frontier justice became the very thing frontier law refused to tolerate. Would you have checked your Colt at the city line or kept it by your side no matter the cost? And if Dodge City banned the Peacemaker to keep the peace, our next entry shows how an even stricter ordinance lit the fuse for the most infamous gunfight in the Old West. Number 2, Tombstone's gun ban, the law that sparked the gunfight at the OK Corral. On April 19, 1881, the town of Tombstone passed Ordinance Number 9. It required everyone entering town to deposit their firearms at a hotel, livery, or with the sheriff. Pistols, rifles, even Bowie knives were included. The message was clear: leave your weapons at the edge of town or face the law. For a booming silver mining town filled with gamblers, cowboys, and drifters, this law was a powder keg waiting to explode. That explosion came on October 26, 1881. When the Earps and Doc Holliday confronted the Clanton and McClory brothers, they weren't just settling a personal feud. They were enforcing Ordinance Number 9. The cowboys had refused to surrender their guns, and the standoff turned into the most famous 30 seconds of gunfire in Western history. So think about this. The legendary gunfight at the OK Corral wasn't about lawmen chasing outlaws into the street. It was about a gun control law and who was willing to obey it. Would you have handed over your revolver or stood your ground like the cowboys? Let me know what you'd have done. And if a single law banning weapons could ignite the most famous shootout of the frontier, our final entry proves something even more shocking. The duel itself, the very image of the Wild West, was outlawed from the start. Number 1, the duel, the most iconic gunfight of the Wild West, and completely illegal. Hollywood made the high noon showdown legendary. 2 men facing off in the street, hands hovering over their pistols. But in reality, territorial and state laws across the West banned dueling outright. In Texas, New Mexico, and many other places, carrying a weapon into a public assembly was a crime. Firing it in a formal duel wasn't just against the law, it could get you jailed, fined, or even hanged if someone died. The myth of the duel is powerful, but the records tell a different story. Newspapers from the 1870s and 1880s condemned the practice as barbaric, and courts treated it as murder, not justice. The West was violent, but it wasn't lawless. Towns and states went out of their way to stamp out ritual gunfights before they spread. And yet, the image survived because it's thrilling, cinematic, and dramatic. A duel on screen sells tickets. A duel in real life could get you killed and prosecuted. So here's the final question. If someone challenged you to a gunfight in 1880, would you take 10 paces and draw, or walk away knowing the law was already against you? Comment your answer. I want to see how many of you would have stood tall. And remember, the Wild West wasn't the free-for-all you see in the movies. Its deadliest guns weren't always celebrated. They were often the very weapons towns tried hardest to ban. And there you have it. 8 Wild West guns so deadly, so feared, they were banned. From Derringers hidden in a sleeve to Winchesters locked away on trains. From Dodge City's revolver ban to Tombstone's infamous Ordinance No. 9. The West wasn't nearly as lawless as the movies would have you believe. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these bans shocked you the most? And if you had to live on the frontier, which gun would you have carried, even if the law was against you? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading through them.